Welcome to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. Like any good marriage, we will debate, evaluate, and sometimes quarrel about how privacy and security impact business in the 21st century.
Hi, Jody Daniels here. I'm the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a certified women's privacy consultancy. I'm a privacy consultant and certified informational privacy professional, providing practical privacy advice to overwhelmed companies.
Hello, Justin Daniels here. Despite my Red Clover t-shirt, I am an equity partner at the law firm Baker Donaldson. I am passionate about helping companies solve complex cyber and privacy challenges during the life cycle of their business. I am the cyber quarterback helping clients design and implement cyber plans as well as help them manage and recover from data breaches.
And this episode is brought to you by Red Clover Advisors. Not everyone can see you pointing at the shirt.
Okay.
But if you were listening, that's what he's trying to do.
That's the metaphor.
We help companies to comply with data privacy laws and establish customer trust so that they can grow and nurture integrity. We work with companies in a variety of fields, including technology, e-commerce, professional services, and digital media. In short, we use data privacy to transform the way companies do business. Together, we're creating a future where there's greater trust between companies and consumers. To learn more and to check out our new best-selling book, Data Reimagined, Building Trust One Bite at a Time, visit redcloveradvisors.com. So I have a question. How come you wear a Red Clover shirt, but I have nothing that has Baker Donaldson on it? That doesn't seem very fair. This would be fun. We could switch swag.
Would you like an umbrella?
I don't want an umbrella. I had a really great umbrella at the privacy conference last week from some lovely people at BDO. If you ever want a really good umbrella.
I don't know.
Good umbrellas.
I think your logo and colors are cooler. So.
Don't you have the same color?
Yeah, but it's a name of a law firm. It's a big deal. I'd rather have something like this. And then people are inquiring.
On the law firm train today because we have a really fabulous guest at a really lovely law firm. So I'm excited to bring Gary Kibel, who is a partner in the digital media, technology, and privacy practice group at the law firm Davis+Gilbert. Gary advises ad tech companies, advertising agencies, publishers, brands, and other commercial entities regarding interactive media, behavioral advertising, social media, programmatic media buying, and other emerging products and services. He's a certified informational privacy professional, and prior to becoming an attorney, he was an Information Systems Analyst in the investment banking division of Merrill Lynch. Well, Gary, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are, wherever you're watching this.
I love it. All right, you're going to kick us off?
Absolutely. So, Gary, tell us about your career and how you got to where you are today.
Sure. So I think I'm kind of a privacy old timer because I've been in this gig for quite a long time. I've been dealing with digital media and privacy issues for well over 20 years. So kind of going back to the Stone Age of the industry where people weren't thinking about data issues very much. As Jody mentioned, I had a technology background and I was a hands-on IT professional before and during law school. So I kind of had that experience of being in a server room late at night, thinking about where the data is actually physically located. And when I got into the legal profession, I started off as a corporate law associate, but those technology issues started coming up and data started becoming more of an issue. So I think privacy went from 5% of my work to 50% of my work to probably 90% of my work these days. And if it's possible to go over 100%, I think that's probably going to happen the way things are happening in the privacy world these days.
So Gary, tell us how you made the switch from being in the server room to a corporate law job.
Well, I mean, if anyone who's ever been in the IT world, I can tell you that I've never felt the level of frustration in law that I felt being in a server room at 2 a.m. looking at the blue screen of death, and there's just nothing you can do. In law, you can just keep arguing and talking and trying to find a way around it. Technology, you hit a brick wall and you're just like, I don't know. I don't know why this server will not reboot. And quite frustrating. But I find the intellectual challenges of law, much more interesting. And so I started off at a different law firm doing corporate work. I wanted to do something more interesting. I came across Davis+Gilbert And Davis+Gilbert's been in the advertising and marketing law industry for well over 100 years. So, as we often say, D&G represented old media when it was new media. So when I joined in 2001, digital was starting to become a bigger issue. I mean, literally the first day I walked in the office, I had a telematics agreement sitting on my chair. And so I got involved in it right away. And the data issues really at the outset were there. And so I got to grow up with the industry. Davis+Gilbert incorporated the Interactive Advertising Bureau, the IAB, and we were there really at the outset of the industry. And so it's been a great journey over these 20 plus years to see digital and privacy and ad tech really boom into the industry it is today.
It's so interesting you said old media, new media. I haven't heard those phrases since my days back at Cox Enterprises when we would look at all the media that they had. I worked there as a financial statement auditor. They were my client. And then I actually worked there for almost a decade. So it was so interesting to hear the new media and old media. That's just like what pops in my head. I used to have all the charts and see where it was all going. It's fascinating. And and here we are gathered here together. Well, we just came back from the IAPP Global Privacy Summit, which in our pre-show we were coining because someone, I wish I could credit them, but I don't remember who, someone on LinkedIn had the brilliant way of explaining it's like the privacy high school reunion, which it truly is. And you did a really special ad tech workshop. And I was hoping for those of us who, and all of our listeners who were not able to attend, maybe what are the one or two nuggets of the day that you hoped everyone walked away with that you could share with everyone today?
Sure. So we did this 3.5-hour ad tech privacy workshop. We had over 200 people in the room. It was a great session. And it was for people who were privacy professionals, but may not have great knowledge in ad tech and digital media. And I would think the important takeaway from that 3.5 hours is, number one, you really need to understand how the tech works, because there are so many players involved in the ad tech ecosystem right now. So you can't just take existing privacy knowledge and plop it right into the ad tech world without understanding how the industry works. And then the second thing is, once you have a good understanding of how the industry works, then you're following the data flows. What data is being shared with what parties and for what purpose. And then once you analyze that, then you can bring your privacy law compliance skills to bear and explain to a client or to your internal company what controls we need to have in place, what disclosures do we need to make, what rights do we need to give a consumer, what contracts do we need to have in place. You got to really have that base of understanding. And I guess that kind of builds on, again, my technology background. Since when I got out of law school and started practicing as a lawyer and doing technology law, I had that technology background in the back of my head. So I was always thinking about the servers, the system, the data, where it's flowing, because that really helps, a lawyer translate that for the business people.
For a newbie who maybe didn't get to go to the workshop and doesn't have access to that material, but they're really interested in this, are there any particular resources you might recommend to get familiar with how the tech works?
Yeah, there are things online. Like, we actually showed a couple of videos during our presentation that the IAB has put out, which shows data flows. And then, you just subscribe to any newsletters these days in the industry, and you'll read the stories about the types of companies in the industry. And then you'll start to learn, what is a DSP? What's an SSP? What's a DMP? There's so many acronyms in our industry. It's kind of crazy. So it's kind of getting into that industry, getting comfortable with the language so you can talk the talk with others in the space.
Well, it wouldn't be an industry without a set of acronyms.
Exactly. We have endless in this one. We can rival many other industries.
So companies that are often trying to find a one-size-fits-all approach. So how can companies comply with the differing requirements and also something that's manageable? Because I think, isn't Indiana about to be state number 7 that's about to sign a privacy law?
It is.
Yeah.
They're joining the C's, like all the letters just need to come. I guess Illinois has one that's been around for a while, not a state comprehensive one, but it's kind of funny how the letters are joining together.
I know. I was trying all these sports analyses, and it was 3, it was, 3-peat, and, then the 5th one, 1 for the thumb. And I don't even know what it is now, but it's going to build and build and build. And, clients often say, because it's very confusing with all these different state comprehensive consumer privacy laws, 6 that have been enacted so far, soon to be 7, certainly more after that. Sometimes clients will say, well, just tell me the strictest standard and I'll comply with that one. It's California, right? And no, that's not always the answer, because the laws don't line up very well with each other. So there's not one strictest standard you can point to and say, I'll just do that and ignore the others. There are variations between the laws. So you have to kind of blend it all together in order to come up with the right compliance approach. And unfortunately, that does make it challenging for companies. But again, understanding what the company does, what type of data they're processing, you might be able to set certain requirements aside because they're not applicable, but you really just can't say, oh, I'll just do one state and make that work and it's one size fits all for everybody. So that's why this area is just really complex and really challenging for businesses, and why everyone is screaming for a federal comprehensive privacy law, because this state by state approach is just getting crazy.
I'm curious for your thoughts on a federal privacy law, not the over under if it's going to happen, but a lot of people say I'm screaming for a law to try and remove some of this. But at the same time, if we look overseas to GDPR, while it's consistent, you still have member states who make their own opinions, which makes it not exactly the same. You have different areas of, this one views Google Analytics is okay, this one views it's not okay. This one wants cookies this way, this one doesn't want cookies this way. So in your opinion, do you think a federal law will mirror that, or really could help solve the 50 state potential framework?
I think, firstly, if the law preempts state laws, then I think it will help a great deal. There have been many privacy bills that have been proposed in Congress that don't preempt state laws. And if they don't preempt state laws, I mean, it makes things worse. Instead of 50 standards, we'll have 51 standards. So there's got to be preemption. But the way that a bill like the ADPPA, which is the one that's made it the farthest in Congress, a lot of them work, they have certain carve-outs where states can still do their own thing. That's the same thing happened when canned spam was enacted 20 years ago. It preempted all these state commercial email laws, but had certain carve-outs to allow states to still regulate certain unfair and deceptive practices. So any federal law is not going to solve everything. There still will be some ability of states to regulate certain practices, but maybe it'll get us 80% of the way there in terms of having one consistent approach.
Since we've been talking about learning ad tech, the complexities of ad tech, how privacy is really hot, we can't line up all these laws, it creates a lot of challenges these days. Can you share maybe some of the big challenges that you're hearing companies bring over and over, and maybe a little bit of how companies can work through some of those?
Sure. I mean, and for those who are familiar with privacy and these new laws, they very loosely fall into 3 buckets. The right to access your information and know what somebody has about you, the right to delete your information, and then the right to opt out of the sale or share or targeted advertising using your data. And it's that 3rd bucket that is the most challenging in this space. If somebody reaches out to you and says, what personal information do you have about me? You can do it. If you have more complex systems, it's harder to respond to that request. If you get 1,000 of those requests a day, it can be harder, but you can answer that question. Same with deletion. If someone says, delete my information, sure, you can do that as well. But it's the opting out right that gets very complex. And the reason it's complex is because when a publisher website has third-party tracking pixels and tags on the site, the data transfers from that publisher site to those ad tech providers in the background are very likely going to be deemed a sale of personal information under California and be used for targeted advertising. And giving the consumer the right to opt out of the use of the data in that manner is complex. And it requires using probably certain third-party service providers to help you manage these opt-outs. So when you explain to someone who's not familiar with the industry about how these opt-outs will work with pixels in the background, that's when their eyes glaze over and realize, wow, this is really a complex area that I need some help to solve.
Understand. Thank you.
So, Gary, what happens from your perspective when you layer the FTC on top of all of this? I think just in the last 2 weeks, there was the big fine to the telehealth company who was turning around and selling patient information in a context of a visit to people to sell them pills and whatnot. And so just can you share for our viewer, and I know I'm adding another layer onto our complex cake, how the FTC part is like a federal overlay that is starting to really have an impact on how we might be advising clients when it comes to privacy issues?
Yeah, exactly. And that, FTC situation has been there all along. So the FTC does not have a ton of tools in their belt. There are some sectoral laws like the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act and the healthcare breach notification rule you were just mentioning, and Graham Leach Bliley, GLB for financial services, HIPAA for healthcare, but they don't have an overarching privacy law to enforce. So what they enforce in the privacy space is often their general authority to regulate deceptive and unfair practices. And they are aggressive in that industry. So if you have a privacy policy that says we don't sell personal data, but you do sell it to a third party, they would argue that's deception. If you collect personal information and you have a breach of that information, they may argue that that's an unfair practice. So that ability for the FCC to regulate deceptive and unfair practices is incredibly broad. They've used that power for decades, and they've applied it to many industries. If you have a car commercial that says the car goes 0 to 60 in 5 seconds, but that's not true, that's deception. So they apply the deceptive and unfair practices ability to the data and ad tech and privacy industries, and it's still there. They're not going away. And even if states pass these new laws, the FCC is still not going away. So what will bring it all together is if there is a federal law and if it has a specific charge for the Federal Trade Commission about what you're supposed to enforce and what's in your lane versus what's in the lane of other regulators.
Gary, cookie banners are everywhere. Some might even say they're kind of doing the opposite of what they were intended to do, and people are not paying attention. And in good cookie humor fun, there's all flavors of cookie banners that are out there as well. What are some of the common mistakes that you're seeing companies make? You might have a long list of them, so you can just pick your top two if you want to.
Yeah, and sticking with the jokes, the cookie may be crumbling here. So there's lots of issues with cookie banners. I mean, this originated in the EU, not in the US, because in the EU, in order to place a cookie on someone's device, that's a non-essential cookie, you need to have consent or some other legal basis to do so. That's not the case in the US. We're mostly still in an opt-out world in the US. However, as we've discussed, you have all these additional rights that you need to give to a consumer and disclosures you need to make to a consumer. And so doing it with the help of a cookie banner is a common approach these days. It's not the solution for everything because someone clicks OK in the cookie banner and it goes away. So I think the common mistakes are thinking the cookie banner solves everything I need to do in terms of compliance. And the second issue may be the language in the cookie banner is something you need to look at very closely. EU regulators have been really criticizing some of the language in cookie banners as not giving consumers enough disclosure and enough choices. So saying you're slapping a cookie banner on your website is helpful, but it's not the end of the story. There's work that has to go into what that cookie banner says and what that cookie banner does and how it ties into all the other compliance features on your site.
And I would add to that, many times people think I put the cookie banner up, I do all that hard work, I figure out what it needs to say, I put it up, I'm good, and then they forget about it. And the business is changing. They might be placing new pixels, different pixels. We know that sometimes they just kind of creep in, and you need to be able to maintain that. So companies need to also be thinking about how I get it right to begin with, and also how do I maintain it. There has to be some type of regular cadence to keep it updated, even if there's no new law, just the current one. Again, because there's changes that happen. And I think that's dependent on the company and how often they change things. Some publishers might need to do it monthly. Some publishers, it might need to be every couple months if there's not too much actually happening.
Yeah, I mean, because privacy compliance is not, a one-time exercise. Things evolve and things change. And the way you're using data will evolve. And the third parties and providers you're working with are going to change. Sometimes I'll look at a new client or the other side's website, and I'll see a privacy policy, and the last updated date is 2018. And I'll say to them, really, you haven't changed anything about your business practices in 5 years? That's probably not the case. So it's really incumbent upon a company to revisit these disclosures, revisit their policies at a minimum on an annual basis, but better yet, more than that. And certainly that every time they're going to work with a new party and a new provider and a new project, to think, how does this impact my privacy program and the disclosures I previously made to people? Because it's evolving so quickly.
So Gary, I was just curious as a follow-up question with all of the ad tech, and you said at the outset your practice is like almost at like 100% privacy. So when you're on these engagements, how often do some of these privacy conversations you're having bleed over into, well, if I have these privacy issues, how am I securing the data? What am I worrying about with a data breach? I mean, when you say that you're a privacy practitioner, is there like some component of, yeah, I'm going to be spending time talking about the cybersecurity issues as well, or is there more of a compartmentalized approach from your perspective?
Yeah, because we say privacy very generally, but it's really privacy and data security. And sometimes they're flip sides of the same coin. Because when we talk about privacy, we're talking about the consumer facing issues that you're dealing with in data collection. But it's a very good point you brought up. Like that internal data security is so incredibly important. And that brings in a whole nother level of compliance, because there are laws that require to have appropriate internal security. There are laws that require certain written policies. And then there's certainly security breach notification laws that if there is suspected unauthorized access, you may have to go and tell the data subjects. So bringing in that data security component is certainly a part of this. And it's important that people don't overlook that as well. Once you take care of that consumer facing aspect, you got to look internally what you're doing there, because there could be just as much liability or greater liability if you do things wrong internally.
We've talked a lot about how CCPA is really complex and privacy overall is really complex. And one of those pieces is the right to opt out. One of the newer rights is very specifically on cross-contextual opt-outs. Gary, can you talk a little bit about what that one is and what companies need to be thinking of?
Sure. And the terms and the acronyms are all over the place. There's CCPA, OBA, IBA, targeted advertising. They're all kind of talking about the same practice. So California talks about cross-context behavioral advertising, which is what those of us in the industry would generally just call behavioral advertising. And quite simply, it's collecting data on one site or service to use that data in order to inform and serve targeted ads on an unaffiliated service. And that cross-context behavioral advertising is now deemed under the California law a share of personal information. If you give data to someone else to use for CCPA, it's a share and someone has the right to opt out. So this is the right for someone to control how their personal data is being used to target ads. It's not a right to opt out of advertising totally. You're still going to get advertising, but the advertising may not be tailored to you based upon personal information or other data that's been collected about you. So, and again, going back to one of the things we said earlier, in order to give consumers the ability to opt out of that type of practice, you're working with tags and pixels on the website and cookies in the background and all these different providers in the ad tech ecosystem. So it's complex to enable that. But all it does is enable someone to opt out of those targeted and personalized advertising, because the regulators think that those practices are creepy and that consumers should have the ability to opt out. I have much more of a pro-business bent. I think that data-driven advertising is what enables so many free services online and on our mobile devices that it's an incredibly positive practice, because you couldn't have free things. Think about on your phone, you're using Waze to find out where you're going to go, and Yelp to find out a good place to have lunch, and social media to connect with people. All these services are free. And they're free for a reason. Why are they free? Because they're monetizing your data. But now we're giving consumers the ability to opt out of monetizing their data in that way. And rightly or wrongly, this is a right, and you have to find out a way to give the consumers that right to do so.
One of the things I think that people find confusing, and I was hoping you might be able to offer some clarity, is we just talked about cross-contextual, but there's also the sale of data. And so we have sale and we have share. Is there anything that you can elaborate on a little bit to help someone who might be, well, which pixel is in the sales side and which might be in the cross-contextual side?
Yeah, it's getting more confusing with sale and share, and these are defined terms. We're not just saying, the normal usage of those terms. And a sale is sharing personal information with another party for monetary or other valuable consideration. And we all thought that that included behavioral advertising under the California law, under CCPA. When CPRA came out, they added a different term of share. And that was basically a subset of sale. So, and share is just for cross-context behavioral advertising. So I guess the simple way to say it is that all shares are sales, but not all sales are shares. So a share, when you're sharing data for cross-context behavioral advertising, that is giving data to someone else for some valuable consideration. But you might be in the business of simply selling data. I am going to give you access to my CRM database for some other reason. It may not be for behavioral advertising, but that could still be a sale. So again, I think, and this is just my opinion, but I think the regulators would agree, all shares are sales, but not all sales are shares.
With that in mind, I think it's important, probably people who have the do not sell my personal information link might need to update that to be do not sell or share my personal information if they're engaging in this type of behavioral advertising. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yes, exactly. And just as we saw when CCPA came out, that companies and website publishers were slow to put up the links or slow to put up the links with the correct wording, I think we're going to see that now going forward. We're going to see links that say, do not sell my personal information when they should legally say, do not sell or share my personal information. But over time, I think companies will come around to doing it the right way.
We're all learning.
So with so much privacy knowledge that you've gained over the years, what is the best privacy tip you'd give your friends at a cocktail party?
Well, you always have to think about yourself. How privacy conscious are you? Are you uncomfortable with, certain information of yours being shared online? If so, then go take a look at the privacy settings on your social media accounts. Are you concerned about the way that your email address is being used? Maybe you should have a second email address for online purchasing. It all depends about what your level of comfort is. For me personally, when I engage with a service, I look at the privacy policy, I look at the tags and pixels on their site, and I try to get a sense, is this a sophisticated player who's in the industry and knows how to behave properly? And if they are, I'm comfortable giving them my data. But if I look at a company and they don't have very good disclosures, or they're old and outdated, or there's something else wrong, I'm uncomfortable working with them. And I may not work with them at all in my personal capacity, or I may be very careful what data I share with them. So it really depends upon what your concern and flavor it is. I mean, there are some people who are, freaking out about privacy right now. And then there are others who would gladly give up their social security number if it meant they got a $5 off coupon. So it really depends upon what your sensitivity is.
That's a great example. Well, when you're not practicing law and giving privacy advice all day long, what do you like to do for fun?
Not practicing law. I mean, come on, we're busy all the time. I mean, hey, as we all joke, we're lawyers. There's 25 hours in a day to bill, right? So, we're busy, but definitely important to have your life outside of work. And I recently moved from New York to Florida because it's the law. I'm a short Jewish lawyer. You got to move to Florida. But I like being outside and enjoying the great weather. And I'm a golfer, and I now live on a golf course, which is fantastic. So whenever I can, I get out and hit the links and just kind of, zone out of work, put down the iPhone, and really enjoy being outside with friends or family.
That does sound very fun. And in Florida, you'll now have many more days to be able to hit the course for sure. Gary, thank you so much for sharing all this very practical information. Where can people connect and learn more?
Sorry about that. Forgive my dog for barking in the background. My dog loves privacy law.
We like dogs.
Yes, exactly. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Gary Kibel. You can go to my firm's website, dglaw.com. Find me there. We have lots of great articles that we put out that you can read there as well. And then you can find me in the physical world because I show up at conferences and events as well. So always happy to connect with people.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Gary. We really appreciate it.
Thanks very much for having me. It was great chatting with you guys.
Thanks for listening to the She Said Privacy, He Said Security podcast. If you haven't already, be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and check us out on LinkedIn. See you next time.